My name is Elena Voss. I was 34 years old, standing in the middle of the Ashcombe Country Club ballroom in a soaked ivory dress, while my mother-in-law pointed a finger at my chest and told 200 people exactly what she thought I was worth. She was never one of us, Diane said. She never will be. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even blink. I just smiled and reached up to touch the small silver watch on my wrist. Welcome back to Cherry Revenge Tales. If stories of quiet strength and calm justice are why you're here, take a second to subscribe and turn on the bell so the next one finds you. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. 6 years earlier, on the day I married Marcus Whitfield, my mother-in-law Diane stood at the edge of the Whitfield family pool in her cream Chanel suit and watched my wedding dress sink into the chlorine like it was something she'd been waiting all afternoon to do. She said it was an accident. She said she'd only meant to move it off the lounge chair before the caterers tracked mud near it. Nobody believed her. My own mother offered to say something, and I told her not to, because I already understood on my wedding day that in that family, silence was the only language that got you invited back to the next one. I was a paralegal then, working nights to finish my law degree at a state school Diane liked to mispronounce on purpose, and she never let me forget where I'd started. At every holiday dinner for 6 years, she introduced me the same way. This is Marcus's wife. She does paperwork, I believe. Her sister-in-law would laugh into her wine. Marcus's brother, Preston, would ask me to refill his glass like I was staff hired for the evening, not family seated at the table. And Marcus, sweet, spineless Marcus, would squeeze my hand under the tablecloth and whisper, "Just get through dinner." As if getting through dinner was a skill I hadn't already spent 6 years, quietly perfected. The gathering that finally broke things open was Diane's 70th birthday, 2 years ago, at the family's lake house in Connecticut. Preston stood up with his glass raised and announced he'd just made partner at his firm, a small regional practice his father-in-law had built for him from nothing but a Rolodex and a golf membership. The table applauded like he'd cured something. Diane cried real tears and told him she'd always known he'd be the one to make her proud. Then she turned to me, sitting quietly at the far end with my untouched plate, and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Elena still hasn't figured out what she wants to be when she grows up. Have you, dear?" Marcus's aunt snorted into her napkin. Preston smirked into his glass. I said nothing. I had, at that point, been working 80-hour weeks for 4 years at a firm none of them had ever once asked the name of. It was that same weekend the demands started. Diane cornered me in the kitchen while I was drying dishes and told me, in the gentle, honeyed voice she used right before she asked for something enormous, that the lake house needed a new roof, and that since Marcus and I were doing so well, it only made sense for us to cover it. She said it would be a shame if certain things about my background came up at Christmas dinner, in front of everyone. I didn't know what she meant. I still don't, entirely. I don't think she did either. Diane didn't deal in facts, she dealt in leverage, and the threat of exposure works exactly as well as the truth does, if you say it with enough confidence and enough smiling menace. Marcus wanted me to just pay it. "It's easier," he said. Later that night in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed with his tie already loosened. "You know how she gets." I asked him what, exactly. "I know how she gets," he didn't have an answer. He said it wasn't about the money, that his mother had always been intense, that she'd softened over the years, that I simply hadn't known her long enough to see it. 6 years of marriage, and I had learned that Marcus's love for me came with a standing exception clause, and the exception was always his mother. Always. Without fail. No matter what it cost me. And it had cost me plenty by then. Quietly. In ways I'd stopped bothering to add up out loud. I asked her, calmly, to put that offer in writing. She laughed like I'd made a joke, and told me nobody puts family arrangements in writing, dear, that's not how families work. I told her I understood perfectly well how this particular family worked, and I hung up the phone still holding the dish towel from that morning, because apparently I hadn't finished with it yet. I told Diane no the following morning, quietly, at the kitchen sink, with a dish towel still in my hand. "I'm not paying for your roof," I said. She told me I had no idea what real money looked like, that I'd married into something I would never understand or deserve, that I was, in her exact words, hired help who got lucky enough to marry the client. She said it loud enough that Preston came in from the porch to watch, arms crossed, delighted. I remember the exact stillness that came over me in that moment, how my hands stopped shaking the second she finished the sentence, like something in me had quietly, permanently closed a door. What none of them knew, what I'd told no one except my assistant and my direct supervisor, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd been informed I was on the final shortlist for managing partner at Halbrook and Vane, a firm with offices in 4 states and a client list that included half the companies the Whitfields liked to name drop at dinner parties as though they personally knew the CEOs. I hadn't told Marcus. I'd stopped telling Marcus things that mattered, somewhere around year 4, once I understood that anything good I said in that house got repeated back to me later. The night everything came apart was the firm's annual gala, held that year at the very same Ashcombe Country Club, where the Whitfields kept their family membership. A coincidence Diane found absolutely delicious once she learned of it. She RSVP'd herself and Preston as my family, uninvited, 3 days before the event, and told Marcus she wanted to see, in her words, what this little job of yours actually looks like up close. I should have stopped it. I didn't. Some quiet, tired part of me wanted her there. Before I left the house that evening, I opened the top drawer of my dresser and took out the smartwatch my sister had given me for my last birthday, the one with the voice memo function I'd never once used in a year of owning it. I turned it over in my hand for a second, then pressed and held the side button until it buzzed twice, confirming the recording had started. I slid it onto my wrist under my sleeve and did not take it off again for the rest of the night, not even once. I was 34. Dark blonde hair pulled back into a low twist with 2 loose pieces framing my face. Fair skin, average height, the kind of build people call slight, right before they underestimate you completely. I wore a deep emerald green silk dress with a fitted bodice and a long, clean skirt, no sequins, nothing loud, a thin gold chain at my throat, and low heels I'd chosen specifically because I suspected, correctly, that I'd be on my feet all night. I was told later by more than one colleague, like exactly what I was. Calm, composed, completely quietly ready. She found me by 6:40, and she did not waste time. So this is the paperwork job, she said, loudly enough for the people near us to turn and look. I have to say, Elena, I expected something a little more substantial. This is it? Passing hors d'oeuvres for real lawyers? Preston laughed. A few strangers laughed too, uncertain, the way people laugh when they haven't yet decided whose side to be on. I told her calmly that I needed her to lower her voice, that this was a professional event and not a family dinner. You were nothing when Marcus met you, and you will still be nothing when this is over. Mother-in-law, she wasn't invited. He nodded once, turned to Diane, with no particular emotion in his face at all, and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back from Ms. Voss. This is a professional event, and in about 8 minutes, I'm introducing her as the new managing partner of this firm's Northeast division. I'd strongly suggest you decide right now whether you want to be standing this close to her when that happens." The color left Diane's face, so fast, I actually watched it happen, like something draining out of a sink. "That's not," she never said. "Marcus, did you know about this? Did you know?" Marcus, standing a few feet away in his good navy suit, looked like a man watching his own house collapse in slow motion, and he said nothing, because for once in 6 years, silence wasn't going to save him this time. "You told her not to say anything about her job," I said to him, quietly, "not for the room, just for him. Every single time we came here, now you know exactly why." Diane's composure cracked entirely then, right there in front of 200 witnesses. She turned on Preston first, hissing that he'd told her I was still just some assistant somewhere downtown, that he'd practically promised her this would be humiliating for me and not the other way around. Preston shot back, red-faced, that he'd only repeated what she'd told him for years, that she was the one who'd insisted on crashing an event she wasn't invited to in the first place. Their voices climbed over each other, ugly and fast. 2 people who had spent years feeding off the same casual cruelty, suddenly turning it on each other, with nowhere left to point. Diane's hand went to her chest, and for a moment, I genuinely thought she might be having some kind of episode, but it was only shame, finally landing somewhere it couldn't be redirected onto someone else. At 6:59, Richard raised the microphone, looked out over the room, and began the introduction as though nothing at all had happened. I stood there in my green silk dress, the watch still on my wrist, quietly recording every second of it, and I felt something in my chest finally go still and settled, the way water goes still long after a stone has already sunk to the bottom. "You said I'd never be one of you," I said to Diane, one last time, before I walked up to take the microphone from Richard's hand. "But I never be one of you," I said to Diane, one last time, before I walked up to take the microphone from Richard's hand. "I'm not one of you. I'm the one running the firm your son's family has spent 6 years trying so hard to impress. Enjoy the rest of the party. I want to tell you something. If you've ever sat quietly at a table while someone decided out loud what you were worth, you don't owe anyone your smallness just because it makes them comfortable. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're just the truth, spoken calmly, at the exact moment someone least expects you to finally have a spine." If this story reminded you of your own quiet strength, hit like, subscribe, and tell me below, where would you have drawn the line?